Hey, Justin Dyson here, Dyson Apiaries. It's the end of July, and what we're going to do today is do some Apivar treatments. I'll talk a little about that treatment method, how to apply it, what some of the advantages are to using this method, and times a year and what's good about that. I'll also kind of walk through a quick late summer inspection. We're getting ready for winter now. These hives did not go to the mountains for sourwood. These were some later splits I made and kind of been building them up, and so they're still here. I'll be bringing bees back from the mountains in another week or so, and so I'll be treating those bees as well. And I know those mite loads are high, so when I treat, I'm treating the entire apiary. We don't do singular hive treatment based on what an individual hive's mite load count is, because if it's in the same apiary, it's going to end up being the same as the other hives. So stick right with us. So I want to talk first just a little bit about Apivar, the treatment method, and why I use Apivar. This is late summer. I have found in my experience that in late summer you will have mites. I've found no exception to the rule. There are times when early spring, sometimes you can get by without a treatment. But I've never, without fail, I've never had had a situation where I could not treat in the fall and successfully winter bees. It's also important to get this treatment on timely. As soon as that sourwood honey flow is over, that treatment needs to be applied. This particular treatment of Apivar cannot be used while honey supers are on. These colonies here, I'm building these up into a double deep. Like I said, these were splits, so they do not have honey supers on. This treatment is effective. The base chemical is amitraz. This is the approved amitraz method. It's Apivar. The treatment method is you put 2 of the strips, and I'll show you the strips, and I should have some gloves on here, but these are the strips. You tear these. There's two in each little pack there. And you got a little tab here that kind of hangs them between the frames. I'll show you. And there's also a little hole. There's also a little hole you can stick a toothpick between them so that they hang a little more freely, if you please. Either way works. But the treatment is you put 2 strips per deep of bees, basically. So in this configuration, if I have bees in both boxes, I'm going to put 2 strips in the bottom, 2 strips in the top, and those strips need to be right in the middle of the brood nest. Don't put them out on the honey frames. It does no good. Your mites are in that brood, and that's where you want that chemical to get a hold of them as soon as they come out of that, emerge out of that, as soon as the brood emerges. Those Varroa come out in the sporadic stage, and that's when you want that chemical to interact with them and drop those mites off. So there's 2 per deep. They need to be 2 frames apart. So if we have a configuration, and I'll dig into that in a minute, but if we have 2 or 3 frames of honey on either side, and then we have 4 or 5 frames in the middle of brood, we want to put that right in the middle of that brood, and then do the same thing in the top. Now sometimes, like in this configuration where I've added the deep kind of later, sometimes I'll manipulate that strategy just a little bit. If most of my brood is in the bottom and kind of spread out, I'll put 3 strips in the bottom and 1 in the top, just so I can center that treatment on the brood. One other thing I kind of failed to mention, so this is a double deep 10 frame configuration, right? So what if we have a different configuration? What if we have a 5 frame nuke? Well, if we just do the math, it's 2 per deep, right? So if we have 10 frames in this deep and it calls for 2 strips, if we have a 5 frame nuke, use 1 strip, right? Put it right in the middle of the brood. kind of the same thing. If we have a double stacked nuke, so 10 total frames, 2 strips, put them in the brood. Sometimes that'll be one in the top, one in the bottom. Sometimes it might be both in the bottom. Depends on what's going on. What if we're using mediums? What if we're using a deep and a medium? I say kind of just use reason. If I had say a triple medium here, that's kind of the equivalent of about 2 deeps. So triple or 4 mediums would be about 3 or 4 mediums would be about the same as a double deep. So just use reason there and kind of do the math on the size of the colony, and you can still use the treatment on label, in my opinion. I know I'll probably get a few comments on, why don't you just go treatment free? Why do you choose to use a synthetic chemical? The response I always give to the treatment free is, and you may disagree with me, and that's fine. Every beekeeper kind of has an opinion on the matter. I personally believe that you cannot be treatment free. Now, disclaimer, hear me out. That does not mean you have to use a synthetic chemical. That does not necessarily mean that you have to use a chemical at all, but you have to do something for mites. And sometimes when you don't use a synthetic, you have to do a lot of things in conjunction in this whole IPM strategy in order to achieve the same result. Run a kind of an intense operation, and coming in and working 60-70 colonies and trying to do drone brood removal and brood cycle breaks with queen caging and screen bottom boards and sugar dusting and on and on and on. There's a lot of different methods we can use. In addition to one of the big ones is swarm control. If I do swarm control, I'm in effect kind of incubating mites, if you know what I'm saying, because when a hive swarms, that's breaking that brood cycle. So I get a lot of times I get the responses, well, I don't do treatments and I don't have problems, and I ask, how much honey did you make? And well, we made a couple quarts of honey off the hive. Well, I'm making 100-120 pounds of honey during each honey flow because I'm managing for swarms and I'm not seeing that brood cycle break. So it depends on what your end result, what you want your end result to be. If you're managing for honey production, you have to manage for swarming because you need that strong 60,000 bee colony, and you can't see a brood cycle break. It doesn't work. So when I break out nukes, sometimes a lot of times I don't have to treat those because I'm initiating a brood cycle break. These colonies in particular, the mite loads are very low in them because they were splits. But the problem is coming back into this same apiary here in the next week will be another 20 or 30 colonies that I'm bringing back in here that have not had a brood cycle break. And when we set those colonies in an intense operation where colonies are sitting side by side, we bring all those other colonies in here. The mites are there's going to be bee drift, there's going to be robbing, there's a whole lot of things, and those mites are going to drift between colonies as well. So this colony right here is just as likely to have mites as the colony I bring back from the mountains that has a high mite load. I know has a high mite load, already checked. They have a high mite load. This colony's sitting right beside of them. They're going to have a high mite load too after a week or so of sitting here. So I want to go ahead and get this treatment on. Another really important thing for mite treatments is to make sure you get them on early. Like I said, as soon as that honey flow is over, we want to get that treatment on. If we're into late summer at this point, so if we back ourselves up to the end of June, we were at the summer solstice, and from then going forward, that's kind of the signal. The bees start kind of preparing for winter. From there forward, those bees that are getting raised in, let's say the bees that are getting raised in August and September, those are the bees that have to live all the way until January, February, and raising that first round of brood. Well, if those bees were infested with mites in those cells, they're loaded down with viruses. The mites have been feeding off of them. The bees are they're sick. And so a lot of times what we'll see is when we don't get treatments on timely, we come into a period where we get into January and the hive is still nice and full, but when they start trying to raise that first round of brood, they just crash and they go to a softball cluster and they die. And the reason for that is those bees were sick that were raised, and those bees had to live for a very long period of time, use up the resources in their body to raise that first round of brood. So we need to raise good, healthy bees. We need to make sure that we get our treatments on timely so that the viral load is low, so that the mite destruction is low, and like I say, we need healthy bees. The last really important fact is ensure that we, after the treatment is over, that we go back and we spot check and we see that the mites are in fact under control. Sometimes when you treat in end of July, 1st of August, you come back, you take your strips out and you do an inspection or a test for mites, and you still see a high mite load. Every treatment is not got 100% efficacy, so we have to monitor for that. So this particular mite treatment is a 42-day treatment. So we know that a worker bee is 21 days, and I guess that's kind of the way they came up with 42 days. It catches 2 complete cycles of brood, because like all the other chemicals, it doesn't penetrate the brood capping. So we have to wait until that pupa emerges, the Varroa mite comes out, and then that chemical interacts with them. So catching 2 complete brood cycles, we have some time for that to happen. This is a contact treatment, so the bees have to rub against this. It gets on their bodies, and they disperse it amongst the colonies by touching each other. And you know, as the mites jump on their backs, it interacts with them. This is a synthetic. It's not a naturally occurring chemical or anything like that. You may choose to use, there's a whole host of other things. I'm not recommending Apivar as the sole type of mite treatment we can use. There are a whole lot of other ones. I'm not going to name them, but I've chosen, for the past couple of years, I've been using the Apivar method. It works very well. You should rotate your chemicals around, try different ones. One cool thing about this one is that it's not heat sensitive, so we don't have to worry about it being 90 degrees like it is today. We can do treatments when it's 90 degrees, and we're not going to run the bees out of the colony like you will with some of the other chemicals. One other thing, like I said, it's a contact treatment, and the bees need to be active in the colony. One of the recommendations for using Apivar is, in a colony like this, go ahead and put some feed on them. Make the hive active. Sometimes this time of year, if we look at the front of this hive, I'll show you in a minute, but they're just kind of dead. They're just sitting there. There's nothing to work. Complete dearth here. The only thing they're really doing is going out and working water and trying to rob another colony. There's just nothing going on. So we need to make sure that hive is active, so we can go into a feeding program, put some feed on top that gets that hive moving. They're moving amongst the hive, they're going up grabbing feed, they're dispersing it through the colony, and the hive is just moving. So that's a good thing when we're treating with a chemical like Apivar. I'm gonna jump in this colony. Sorry for all the talking there, but I feel like a lot of that stuff, we need to understand that as we're using these chemicals. And I'm gonna jump in here and show you how we put this in. Also, while I'm in here, I'm gonna do kind of a quick inspection. I'll show you what I'm doing this time of year. One other thing I forgot to mention, make sure you pay attention to the date. The date's printed on the back of Apivar. I ran into an issue one year and did not check that, and the stuff was out of date. After it, manufactured date, after it's been about a year, the stuff, the efficacy rate goes way down. So make sure that when you buy this Apivar, if you're ordering online, call the people up and say, hey, I want to know what that date is on the stuff that you're going to ship me, because if you get old stuff and you treat your bees with it, it will not work as effective as it should, and you're going to come back in August and find sick. You're going to come back at the end of August or 1st of September, and you're going to find sick bees because the mite load is still through the roof. Make sure you check that date. Of course, one of the things you see this time of year is the beetle counts go up. It's always frustrating. There's a lot of different methods we can use to control that. That's another discussion. I always sit and mash about half of them while I'm in there. Curious to see how this colony's doing. It's got some foundation in the top. I'm not quite got hammered down on feeding these yet, but yeah, they still need to increase their population some, so we'll make that happen with some stimulation. Have to be very cognizant of robbing this time of year, so we don't want to spend much time in this colony because there are scout bees out constantly, and once you get that started, it is an absolute nightmare to shut down. So be deliberate, gentle but deliberate, and figure out what you have going on. So I'm looking at a frame here. I see some seal brood. I see some very young larvae. I feel like I'm probably queen right. It's a good sign. I'm gonna look at one more frame. Yes, halfway decent pattern. Not perfect, but halfway decent. Back feeling a little bit of honey there where I fed them a little bit. I've not wanted to jump up and draw that foundation simply because the population is not quite where it needs to be. So I need to continue to stimulate them. One thing we could do is add a little bit of pollen sub if we wanted to, and feed them. Have to be really careful with pollen sub this time of year as the beetle population increases. Like I was talking about, this colony still have some foundation in the top, and I'm gonna look really quickly, but I don't feel like there's any brood in the top yet. And so I'm gonna put 3 strips in the bottom because that's where my brood's at. Yeah. Well, there's just a little bit of brood, so that's good. That's good. We got a little bit of brood up here. We'll put that right there. Make sure my queen's not right there. I'm gonna mash these frames. Yep. So after you open a pack, you really don't want to store that for any length of time. I opened this yesterday. Treated some other colonies yesterday. So I kind of like to kind of offset them just a little bit. Be careful as you're putting them down through there. Sometimes it's tight. Kind of like to give it a little wiggle. Make sure I'm not mashing a queen or something. So 2 frames apart, I can see from the top I have brood here. So I'm putting that on brood. I know this is on brood, and there's brood over to here. So I'm gonna put two more frames. I'm gonna go ahead and set this back up. Like I say, that's still got some foundation in it. I made sure I have 2 solid frames here. You wouldn't want to hang this between foundation, because that would really jack that up. They would make a mess trying to draw around that strip. So I made sure it was 2 frames fully drawn here, and that's where I'm going to put that strip. This hive could get by with probably only 3 strips based on the bees, but my experience with these splits are they're growing, and by the time that 42 days is over, they're covering all of these. So I want to go ahead and I want to make sure I have enough of the treatment on here. Go ahead and set them back in place. Let's get them covered back up. And I'll come back tonight and put some feed on these colonies. I like to feed really late in the afternoon or night, because it seems to get the bees excited. And just a quick note, hive top feeder. See, there's an entrance here. If you're using this telescoping top, when you put this on, you notice that it has some wiggle room to keep the bees from coming in that top entrance and getting to the feed. You pull it slightly back to where it seals that front entrance off. So there you have, you know, an Apivar treatment. Like I say, that's what I'm using right now. I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna make a note here on what the date was that I did the treatment. I do a whole apiary at once so I can keep up with when they need to come off. 42 days later, I need to come back, take those strips off. I think you can leave it on a maximum of 52 days, I think. So during this cycle here, if I go back in here, say in 2 or 3 weeks, and I notice that the brood has shifted, I need to shift those strips with that brood. Make sure that those strips stay in contact with the brood, because that's where our mites are at, and that's where we need to control them. I hope you found this helpful. Reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, and I'll do my best to answer. That's just the method we're using here in late summer in North Carolina. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know any videos you'd like to see, and I'll do my best to answer questions and try to put some content out there that works for you and helps you out in your bee adventures. Thanks.